Have you ever wondered what would happen if the person you trusted most in the world turned out to be someone completely different? That question haunted a Reddit user who shared their story in a late-night post that still gives me chills every time I think about it. The first account comes from a user who went by the handle Night Shift Nurse. She worked at a small regional hospital in rural Montana, the kind of place where everyone knows everyone and nothing truly shocking ever happens. At least, that's what she thought, until she started noticing strange patterns during her overnight shifts in the emergency department. It began innocuously enough. Sarah, as I'll call her, had been working nights for about 3 years when she first noticed that certain patients seemed to arrive with unusual frequency. Not unusual in terms of medical emergencies, but unusual in terms of timing and circumstances. Every few weeks. Always on nights, when she was working alone with just one doctor, a patient would come in with what appeared to be severe food poisoning or sudden onset illness. The symptoms were always similar: violent nausea, disorientation, memory gaps, and a peculiar metallic taste in their mouth that they couldn't explain. What made these cases stand out wasn't just the symptoms, though. It was the fact that these patients all shared one strange commonality. They had all eaten at the same small diner about 20 miles outside of town within 12 hours of their arrival at the hospital. Sarah initially dismissed this as coincidence. Small towns have limited dining options, and food poisoning outbreaks weren't unheard of. But as a trained medical professional, she couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. The symptoms didn't match typical food poisoning patterns, and the timing was too consistent to be random. The patients who came in always arrived alone, despite most of them mentioning they had been dining with friends or family. When Sarah tried to follow up on their conditions or contact their companions, she hit dead ends. Phone numbers didn't work, addresses didn't exist, and the patients themselves seemed oddly reluctant to provide details about their dining companions. What really started to trouble Sarah was the way Dr. Mitchell, the attending physician during these night shifts, handled these cases. Mitchell had been at the hospital for over 15 years and was generally regarded as competent and thorough. But with these particular patients, his approach seemed different. He would rush through examinations, provide quick treatments, and discharge patients as soon as their immediate symptoms subsided, often within just a few hours. More disturbing was how Dr. Mitchell seemed to anticipate these arrivals. Sarah noticed that on nights when these mysterious patients appeared, Dr. Mitchell would arrive at the hospital earlier than usual and would already have certain medications prepared. He would also send Sarah on extended breaks or assign her tasks in other parts of the hospital during the treatment of these patients. The breaking point came on a particularly quiet Tuesday night in October. Sarah had been feeling increasingly paranoid about the whole situation and had started keeping detailed notes about these cases. She had documented 17 similar incidents over the past 8 months, all following the exact same pattern. That night, when another disoriented patient arrived from the same diner, Sarah decided to investigate more thoroughly. Instead of taking her usual break when Dr. Mitchell suggested it, Sarah lingered near the examination room, pretending to work on paperwork at the nurse's station. What she overheard through the partially open door made her blood run cold. Dr. Mitchell wasn't just treating the patient. He was interrogating them. The questions weren't medical in nature. Dr. Mitchell was asking about the patient's family, their job, their daily routines, their financial situation, and whether they had told anyone about their dinner plans. The patient, still clearly disoriented and struggling to focus, answered these questions with obvious confusion, as if compelled to respond despite their condition. Sarah's hands trembled as she continued to eavesdrop. Dr. Mitchell's voice took on an almost hypnotic quality as he asked increasingly personal questions. Where did the patient keep their spare house key? What was their work schedule? Did they live alone? Who would notice if they didn't come home for a few days? The most chilling moment came when Sarah heard Dr. Mitchell say, "You won't remember this conversation. You won't remember anything unusual about tonight. You felt sick. You came to the hospital. You were treated for food poisoning. And you went home feeling better. Nothing else happened." Sarah realized she was witnessing something far more sinister than medical malpractice. She quietly retreated to the supply closet and called the state police, her hands shaking so badly she could barely dial the number. When the officers arrived 2 hours later, they found Dr. Mitchell in his office, calmly completing paperwork. The patient from earlier was gone, discharged according to the official records. The investigation that followed revealed a conspiracy that stretched back nearly a decade. Dr. Mitchell hadn't been randomly encountering these patients. He had been working with the owner of that remote diner to systematically drug unsuspecting customers with a cocktail of substances designed to make them suggestible and cause temporary memory loss. The diner owner would identify potentially valuable targets, people traveling alone with expensive belongings, or those who mentioned having valuables at home. These victims would be drugged during their meal and then directed to seek medical attention at the hospital. Dr. Mitchell would then extract personal information from them while they were in their compromised state and use that information to burglarize their homes while they recovered from their wholeness. But the truly horrifying discovery came when investigators searched Dr. Mitchell's home. In his basement, they found detailed files on over 200 victims spanning nearly 10 years. Most had been simple burglary cases, but 17 files were marked with red ink. These were people who had somehow resisted the drugs or become suspicious during their hospital visit. Those 17 people had never made it home from the hospital. Sarah's testimony led to the conviction of both Dr. Mitchell and his accomplice. The investigation revealed that several missing persons cases in the region could be traced back to their operation. Sarah left nursing shortly after the trial and now works as a medical device sales representative in a different state. She still has nightmares about those quiet night shifts and wonders how many times she unknowingly assisted in preparing victims for what they thought was medical treatment. The second story comes from a user called Suburban Dad and takes place in what most people would consider the safest possible environment, a quiet residential neighborhood where children play in the streets and everyone knows their neighbors' names. Mark had lived in his subdivision for 12 years with his wife and 2 young daughters. Their neighborhood was the epitome of suburban tranquility, complete with well-maintained lawns, friendly block parties, and a strong sense of community. The houses were close enough together that neighbors could easily chat over backyard fences, but far enough apart to provide privacy. It was the kind of place where people felt comfortable leaving their doors unlocked and their garage doors open while working in the yard. The strange occurrences started small, the kind of thing that's easy to dismiss as coincidence or imagination. Mark began noticing that items in his house would be slightly out of place when he came home from work. A coffee mug moved from one counter to another, a book left open to a different page, a family photo turned at a different angle. His wife, Jennifer, worked part-time from home and insisted she hadn't moved anything. Initially, Mark attributed these minor changes to the normal chaos of family life. With 2 children under 10, the house was constantly in flux, and it was easy to forget exactly where you had left something. But as weeks passed, the incidents became more frequent and more unsettling. The family began finding evidence that someone had been in their house during the day while Mark was at work and Jennifer was out running errands or picking up the children. Food would be missing from the refrigerator, not entire meals, but small portions as if someone had been snacking. The television would be tuned to different channels, and the DVR would show programs that none of them had recorded. Most disturbing were the personal violations. Jennifer discovered that someone had been going through her dresser drawers. Her underwear had been rearranged, and several items were missing. Mark found that his laptop had been used while he was away, with recent browser history showing searches for their children's schools, their work schedules, and local real estate listings. The family installed security cameras, but whoever was entering their home seemed to know exactly where the cameras were positioned. The intruder would move through blind spots with the precision of someone intimately familiar with the layout of their house and the placement of their security system. Jennifer became increasingly paranoid and started staying home more often. But even when she was present, strange things continued to happen. She would hear footsteps in other parts of the house, doors would creak open and closed, and she would catch glimpses of movement in her peripheral vision. When she investigated these disturbances, she never found anything out of place, but she couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching her. The situation escalated when their 8-year-old daughter, Emma, began talking about the quiet man who visited during the day. According to Emma, the quiet man was very nice and would sit with her while she watched cartoons after school. He knew all about her favorite shows and would sometimes bring her small toys or candy. Emma described him as someone who looked familiar, but couldn't quite place where she had seen him before. Mark and Jennifer were horrified. They questioned Emma extensively, but her descriptions were frustratingly vague. The quiet man was average height, had brown hair, and wore normal clothes like jeans and t-shirts. When pressed for more details, Emma would become confused and couldn't seem to remember specific features of his face. She insisted that he was friendly and made her promise not to tell her parents about their visits because it would be their special secret. The family immediately contacted the police, but without concrete evidence of forced entry or definitive proof that someone had been in their home. The officers could only file a report and increase patrols in the neighborhood. They advised the family to change their locks and consider upgrading their security system. Mark took time off from work to investigate personally. He installed additional hidden cameras and spent days reviewing footage. looking for any sign of the intruder. What he discovered was far more disturbing than he had anticipated. The cameras revealed that someone was indeed entering their home, but not through doors or windows as they had assumed. The intruder was coming from within the house itself. After careful analysis of the footage, Mark realized that someone had been living in their crawl space above the garage for months, possibly longer. The space was accessible through a small panel in the ceiling of their laundry room, a panel that was hidden behind tall storage shelves that the family rarely moved. The intruder had created a small living area in the crawl space, complete with bedding, stored food, and personal items stolen from the house below. Mark waited until his family was safely out of the house before confronting the intruder. When he climbed into the crawl space, he found not a stranger, but someone who was terrifyingly familiar. The quiet man living above his family was David Chen, the previous owner of their house. David had sold them the house 12 years earlier after going through a bitter divorce. He had seemed like a nice enough person during the sale process, helping them understand the quirks of the house and providing detailed information about the neighborhood. What David had failed to mention was that he had never truly accepted the sale of his family home. After the sale, David's life had continued to deteriorate. He lost his job, struggled with depression, and became increasingly obsessed with the life he had lost. He began driving by his old house regularly, watching Mark's family live the life he felt should have been his. Eventually, his obsession drove him to find a way back into the house. David had kept a spare key and detailed knowledge of the house's layout. He knew about the crawl space access point because he had used it for storage during his ownership. Over time, he had been gradually moving back into the house, living like a ghost in the spaces between the walls. During the confrontation, David broke down completely. He explained that he hadn't meant to scare anyone. He just missed his home and wanted to feel close to the life he had lost. He claimed that he had grown fond of Mark's family and considered himself a protective presence in the house. In his delusional state, he believed that his daily presence was helping to keep the family safe. David had been stealing small amounts of food and personal items not out of malice, but because he wanted to feel like part of the family. He would watch their routines, learn their preferences, and try to anticipate their needs. When he interacted with Emma, he genuinely thought he was providing comfort and companionship to a child who sometimes seemed lonely after school. The most chilling revelation came when police searched David's makeshift living space. They found detailed journals documenting every aspect of Mark's family life, going back nearly 2 years. David had recorded their conversations, photographed their activities, and created elaborate fantasies about being part of their family structure. He had also been planning for a more permanent integration into their lives. The journals revealed that David had been considering ways to eliminate Mark so that he could take over as the husband and father figure. He had researched methods of making deaths appear accidental and had been studying Mark's routines to identify the optimal time and place for such an event. David was arrested and eventually convicted of stalking, breaking and entering, and making terroristic threats. He was sentenced to 15 years in prison with mandatory psychiatric treatment. Mark's family moved to a different state within 6 months of the discovery, unable to continue living in a house where they had unknowingly shared their most intimate moments with a delusional stranger. The truly horrifying aspect of both of these stories isn't just the violation and betrayal involved, but the realization of how long these situations had been occurring without detection. Sarah worked alongside Dr. Mitchell for years before recognizing the pattern of his crimes. Mark's family lived unknowingly with David for nearly 2 years before discovering his presence. These cases highlight a terrifying truth about the world around us. The people we trust, the places we consider safe, and the routines we depend on can all be compromised in ways that remain invisible until circumstances force the truth into the light. The most effective predators aren't strangers lurking in dark alleys. They're the trusted doctor treating your illness, or the quiet presence you never even know is there. Both Sarah and Mark's experiences serve as stark reminders that our sense of security is often built on assumptions that may not be as solid as we believe. The hospital where Sarah worked was supposed to be a place of healing and safety, but it became a hunting ground for victims. Mark's home was supposed to be his family's private sanctuary, but it had been invaded by someone who felt entitled to share in their most personal moments. What makes these stories particularly disturbing is how ordinary and believable they are. There are no supernatural elements, no extraordinary circumstances, just regular people whose lives were dramatically altered by the hidden actions of others. The horror comes not from monsters or ghosts, but from the realization that the comfortable boundaries we rely on to feel safe can be crossed by people who have learned to hide their true intentions behind familiar faces and trusted positions. The investigation into Dr. Mitchell's crimes revealed that several other medical professionals in different states had been operating similar schemes, suggesting that this type of systematic exploitation may be more common than anyone wants to acknowledge. Similarly, cases of people secretly living in others' homes have been documented across the country, with many incidents likely going undetected for extended periods. These stories force us to confront uncomfortable questions about the nature of trust and security in modern society. How well do we really know the people we encounter in professional settings? How secure are the spaces we consider private? What signs might we be missing in our daily routines that could indicate our safety has been compromised? The psychological impact on the victims in both cases extended far beyond the immediate trauma of discovery. Sarah struggled with trust issues that affected her ability to work in medical settings. Mark's family experienced ongoing anxiety about their personal security that influenced every decision about where to live and how to organize their daily lives. Perhaps most unsettling is the reminder that these situations can develop gradually over time, with warning signs that are easy to dismiss or rationalize until they reach a crisis point. The incremental nature of these violations allows them to become normalized in the victims' minds, making detection even more difficult. Both stories serve as cautionary tales about the importance of trusting instincts when something feels wrong, even if the evidence seems insufficient to justify concern. Sarah's growing unease about the pattern of mysterious patients ultimately led to the exposure of a serious criminal operation. Mark's family's persistence in investigating strange occurrences in their home likely prevented a much more serious outcome. These accounts from Reddit remind us that the most effective horror stories are often those that could happen to anyone, in any place, at any time. The true terror lies not in the extraordinary, but in the possibility that our ordinary lives may already be compromised in ways we haven't yet discovered.